Hi everybody. Today's story is the tale of the Flopsy Bunnies. It is said that the effect of eating too much lettuce is soporific. I have never felt sleepy after eating lettuces, but then I am not a rabbit. They certainly had a very soporific effect upon the Flopsy Bunnies. Do you know what soporific means? It means it puts them to sleep. Can you see all those bunnies sleeping right there? When Benjamin Bunny grew up, he married his cousin Flopsy. They had a large family and they were very improvident and cheerful. I don't remember the separate names of all their children, but they were generally called the Flopsy Bunnies. As there was not always quite enough to eat, Benjamin used to borrow cabbages from Flopsy's brother Peter Rabbit, who kept a nursery garden. Look at all those Flopsy bunnies. There's so many of them. No wonder there's not enough for all of them to eat. Sometimes Peter Rabbit had no cabbages to spare. When this happened, the Flopsy bunnies went across the field to a rubbish heap in the ditch outside Mr. McGregor's garden. Mr. McGregor's rubbish heap was a mixture. There were jam pots and paper bags and mountains of chopped grass from the mowing machine, which always tasted oily, and some rotten vegetable marrows and an old boot or two. One day, oh joy, there were a quantity of overgrown lettuces which had shot into flower. So there are the Flopsy bunnies, off to see what they can find in Mr. McGregor's rubbish heap. And on this day, they found some lettuces. Look how they're eating. Yummy, yummy, nice lettuces. The Flopsy bunnies simply stuffed lettuces. By degrees, one after the other, they were overcome with slumber and lay down in the mown grass and went to sleep. Benjamin was not much overcome as his children. Before going to sleep, he was sufficiently wide awake to put a paper bag over his head to keep off the flies. So, all the bunnies have eaten so much lettuce that they've fallen asleep, and Benjamin Bunny has put a paper bag over his head to keep off the flies. The little Flopsy bunnies slept delightfully in the warm sun. From the lawn below, in the garden, came the distant clackety-clackety sound of the mowing machine. The blue bottles buzzed about the wall, and the little old mouse picked over the rubbish amongst the jam pots. I can tell you her name. She was called Thomasina Tittlemouse, a wood mouse with a long tail. There she is. She hasn't eaten any lettuces, and so she is wide awake and not so sleepy like the little rabbits. She rustled across the paper bag and wakened Benjamin Bunny. The mouse apologized profusely and said that she knew Peter Rabbit. While she and Benjamin were talking close under the wall, they heard heavy tread of footprints above their heads, and suddenly Mr. McGregor emptied out a sack full of lawn mowings right on top of the sleeping Flopsy bunnies. Benjamin shrank down under his paper bag, and the mouse hid inside a jam pot. There they are, having a good chat, and while they were chatting, Mr. McGregor poured some lawn mowings on top of their heads. The little rabbits smiled sweetly in their sleep under the shower of grass. They didn't wake up, because the lettuces had been so soporific. They dreamt about their mother Flopsy, and that she was tucking them up in a bed full of hay. Mr. McGregor looked down after emptying his sack. He saw some funny little brown tips of ears sticking up through the lawn mowings, and he stared at them for quite some time. Can you see Mr. McGregor's boots as he stands on the wall pouring the grass over the edge? Can you see the little bunny's ears sticking out? Well, Mr. McGregor can see those too. Presently a fly settled on one of them and it moved. One of the bunny's ears twitched. Mr. McGregor climbed down onto the rubbish heap. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little rabbits, he said as he dropped them into his sack. The Flopsy bunnies dreamt that their mother was turning them over in bed. They stirred a little bit in their sleep, but still they did not wake up. Mr. McGregor tied up the sack and left it on the wall. He went to put away the mowing machine. Oh dear, Mr. McGregor has put the little rabbits into a sack. That's not very nice, is it? While he was gone, Mrs. Flopsy Bunny, who had remained at home, came across the field. She looked suspiciously at the sack and wondered where everybody was. Then the mouse came out of her jam pot, and Benjamin took the paper bag off his head, and they told her the whole sad story. Benjamin and Flopsy were very worried. They could not undo the string. The baby bunnies were trapped inside the bag. But Mrs. Tittlemouse was a resourceful person. She nibbled a hole in the bottom corner of the sack. There's their mother, Flopsy Bunny, coming down the road to find them. Only to find them tied up inside a sack. The little rabbits were pulled out of the hole that Mrs. Tittlemouse had nibbled, and they pinched them all awake. Their parents stuffed the empty sack with 3 rotten vegetable marrows and an old blacking brush and 2 decaying turnips. And then they all hid inside a bush and watched for Mr. McGregor. So there they are, taking the baby bunnies out of the hole that Thomasina Tittlemouse nibbled in the sack, and they're putting some rotten vegetables inside instead. And then they sit inside the bushes, waiting to see if Mr. McGregor will come and find his sack again. Mr. McGregor came back. He picked up the sack and he carried it off. He carried it hanging down as if it were rather heavy. The Flopsy bunnies followed at a safe distance. They watched him go inside his house, and then they crept up to the window to listen. Mr. McGregor threw down the sack on the stone floor in a way that would have been extremely painful to the Flopsy bunnies if they had happened to be inside of it. Here goes Mr. McGregor with his sack. He thinks he's got some bunnies inside, but actually he's got rotten vegetables. And look, the bunnies are following him to see what he gets up to. They could hear him drag his chair on the flags and chuckle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little rabbits, said Mr. McGregor. Huh? What's that? What have you been spoiling now? Inquired Mrs. McGregor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little rabbits, repeated Mr. McGregor, counting on his fingers. 1, 2, 3. Don't be silly. What do you mean, you silly old man? In the sack. 4, 5, 6 little rabbits, said Mr. McGregor. The youngest Flopsy bunny got up onto the windowsill. There they all are, sitting outside the window, watching Mr. McGregor, telling Mrs. McGregor about the rabbits in the sack. Mrs. McGregor took hold of the sack and felt it. She said she could feel 6, but they must be old rabbits because they were so hard and they were all different shapes. Not fit to eat, but the skins will make a fine old cloak for me. "Line your old cloak," shouted Mr. McGregor. "I shall sell them and buy myself something nice. Rabbit tobacco. I shall skin them and cut off their heads," said Mr. McGregor. Oh, he's not very nice. Mrs. McGregor untied the sack and put her hand inside. And when she felt the vegetables, she became very angry. She said Mr. McGregor had done it on purpose. And Mr. McGregor was very angry too. One of the rotten marrows came flying through the kitchen window and hit Flopsy Bunny. He was rather hurt. And then Benjamin and Flopsy thought it was time to go home. So Mr. McGregor did not get his tobacco, and Mrs. McGregor did not get her rabbit skins. But the next time by the next Christmas, Thomasina Tittlemouse got a present of enough rabbit wool to make herself a cloak and a hood and some handsome muff and a pair of warm mittens. I think the rabbits gave her some special rabbit fluff because she helped them nibble a hole in that sack and get their children out. Thankfully, they all got away and went home to bed.